He mopped bathrooms and found something forgotten. The Grand Central Terminal breathed differently at night. Arthur Kowalski knew this better than anyone, having spent the last 15 years navigating its corridors with a mop bucket and a ring of keys that opened doors most New Yorkers never knew existed. At 57, with graying hair and hands permanently roughened from industrial cleaning chemicals, he had become as much a fixture of the station as the constellation ceiling in the main concourse. His shift began when the last commuter trains departed for Westchester, leaving behind a cathedral of marble and limestone that echoed with the ghosts of a million journeys. October rain hammered against the high windows as Arthur pushed his cart toward the lower-level bathrooms, the ones near track 117 that hadn't been renovated since the 1970s. These were his domain, the forgotten corners where original marble fixtures still bore the patina of age, where Art Deco tiles created patterns that modern designers could never replicate. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as he propped open the heavy wooden door, the brass hinges groaning their nightly protest. The bathroom was empty, as it always was at 2:47 a.m. Arthur had developed a routine so precise he could clean the entire space with his eyes closed. First, the mirrors, streaked with fingerprints from travelers checking their appearance before important meetings or final goodbyes. Then the sinks, where he'd found everything from wedding rings to suicide notes over the years. The marble countertops required special care, a gentle circular motion that preserved their luster without damaging the delicate veining. As he worked, Arthur thought about Maria, his daughter who lived in Seattle now, working for some tech company whose name he could never remember. She called less frequently these days, caught up in a life that moved at a speed he couldn't comprehend. His ex-wife Sandra had remarried a real estate developer in Connecticut, living in a house with more bathrooms than Arthur cleaned in a single shift. He didn't begrudge them their choices, but sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night shift, he wondered when his life had become so small, so contained within these walls. The cast-iron radiator in the corner clanged suddenly, startling him from his reverie. It was an ancient thing, installed when the terminal was built in 1913, its ornate design a testament to an era when even functional objects were crafted with beauty in mind. Arthur had cleaned around it thousands of times, but tonight, as he maneuvered his mop behind it, something caught. Not the usual debris of tissues or candy wrappers, but something solid, wedged deep in the narrow space between the radiator and the wall. He knelt down, his knees protesting against the cold tile floor, and reached into the darkness. His fingers found leather, soft and worn, covered in decades of dust. With careful effort, he extracted a small notebook no larger than his palm, bound in brown leather that had once been expensive but was now cracked with age. The cover bore no markings, just the gentle wear of having been held countless times. Arthur sat back on his heels, forgetting about the wet floor, forgetting about his schedule. In 15 years of finding lost objects, from cell phones to children's toys, nothing had ever felt quite like this. The notebook seemed to pulse with untold stories, with secrets that had been waiting in the darkness for someone, anyone, to discover them. He glanced around the empty bathroom as if seeking permission from the marble walls themselves before carefully opening the cover. The first page bore a name written in fountain pen ink, faded but still legible. Eleanor Margaret Hartley, 1943. Below it, in smaller script, "If found, please understand that these words were all I had." Arthur's hands trembled slightly as he turned the page, revealing handwriting so elegant it seemed to transform the dingy bathroom into something more refined, more significant. He had found more than a forgotten object. He had found a voice from the past, waiting 70 years to be heard. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as if acknowledging the moment, and Arthur Kowalski, janitor of forgotten spaces, became the keeper of Eleanor's story. The break room on the terminal's sub-basement level hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. Its wood-paneled walls and orange plastic chairs, a time capsule of municipal indifference. Arthur sat alone at the scratched formica table, the notebook open before him, a cup of bitter coffee growing cold at his elbow. Outside the narrow window, he could see the occasional taxi splash through puddles on 42nd Street, their yellow bodies reflecting in the wet pavement like fleeting thoughts. Eleanor's handwriting drew him in, each loop and curve a deliberate act of creation. The first entry was dated March 15, 1943. Mother says I shouldn't take the secretary position at the War Department office, that nice girls from Gramercy Park don't work in government buildings. But how can I sit in our parlour, practicing needlepoint and waiting for acceptable suitors when the world is burning? When men my age are dying in places I can't even pronounce? Tomorrow, I start my new life. Arthur found himself leaning closer, as if proximity could bridge the decades between them. Eleanor wrote about her daily commute through Grand Central, about the soldiers she saw heading to training camps, their faces so young they seemed like boys playing dress-up in their father's uniforms. She wrote about the rationing, how she'd given up silk stockings and drawn lines on the backs of her legs with eyebrow pencil to maintain the illusion. But most of all, she wrote about the loneliness of being 22 in a world that seemed to be ending and beginning simultaneously. Then on April 27, 1943, a new name appeared, Lieutenant James Sullivan, U.S. Army Air Forces. Eleanor had met him at the information booth, the famous one with the four-faced clock that still stood in the main concourse. He'd been lost, looking for track 19, his uniform crisp but his eyes betraying his nervousness. She'd walked him to the platform, and he'd asked if he could write to her. I gave him my address, Eleanor wrote. Mother would be scandalized. But when he smiled, I saw something worth the scandal. The letters from James began arriving 2 weeks later, forwarded from his training base in Texas. Eleanor transcribed portions into her diary, and through her careful preservation, Arthur could hear James's voice too, young, earnest, trying to sound brave while admitting his fears. He wrote about flying, about the beauty of clouds from above, about how he thought of her when he saw the sunrise from the cockpit. Eleanor responded with stories of New York, sending him pressed flowers from Central Park, descriptions of concerts at Carnegie Hall, anything to give him something beautiful to hold on to. By September 1943, James had been deployed to England. The letters became less frequent, but more intense. Eleanor's diary entries grew more anxious, scanning newspapers for any mention of the 8th Air Force, calculating time differences, wondering if silence meant he was flying missions, or something worse. She began spending her lunch hours at St. Bartholomew's Church on Park Avenue, not praying exactly, but sitting in the quiet, hoping that somewhere across an ocean, James could feel her thinking of him. Arthur rubbed his eyes, suddenly aware that 2 hours had passed. His supervisor, Carlos, would be making rounds soon, and he still had 3 more bathrooms to clean, but he couldn't close the notebook, not yet. He flipped forward, watching the seasons change through Eleanor's words. Christmas 1943, spent volunteering at the USO canteen in Times Square. New Year's 1944, when she received a photograph of James standing beside his B-17 bomber. Eleanor's wings painted on the nose. Spring 1944, when the letters stopped for 3 terrifying weeks before resuming with an explanation of a mission gone wrong, a crash landing in occupied France, a resistance group that had hidden him until he could return to base. The diary captured not just Eleanor's love story, but a portrait of wartime Manhattan, the blackout drills, the victory gardens sprouting in unlikely places, the women taking on jobs previously reserved for men, the telegraph boys whose appearance at any door could mean devastation. Arthur found himself invested not just in Eleanor and James, but in the entire world she described, a New York that existed beneath the one he knew, like a palimpsest waiting to be discovered. He touched the pages gently, aware that he was probably the first person to read these words since Eleanor had written them, a responsibility that felt both overwhelming and sacred. The following night, Arthur arrived at work early, telling Carlos he needed to check supplies in the storage room when really he wanted to return to Eleanor's diary. He had thought about it all day, while trying to sleep in his studio apartment in Queens, while riding the N train, while eating a bodega sandwich that tasted like cardboard. The notebook had transformed from an object into an obligation, as if Eleanor herself had tasked him with witnessing her story. He settled into a different spot this time, a maintenance closet near track 117, where he'd found the diary. It felt appropriate somehow to read her words near the place where they'd been hidden. The building's bones seemed to listen along with him, the pipes clanging occasionally, like punctuation marks. Eleanor's 1945 entries began with forced optimism. The war in Europe was winding down, everyone could feel it. James's letters spoke of rumors, of German forces in retreat, of a homecoming that finally seemed possible. Eleanor had begun planning, secretly purchasing a wedding dress with her saved ration coupons, imagining a future that included a small apartment in Brooklyn, maybe children who would have James's eyes and her stubborn chin. May 8th, 1945, VE Day. Eleanor described the celebration in Times Square, the strangers kissing, the confetti falling like snow, the sense that the world had been given a second chance. But James was still in Europe, part of the occupation force, his return date uncertain. Eleanor waited, her diary entries becoming a countdown of sorts. She left her job at the War Department, not wanting to miss his arrival. She haunted Grand Central, knowing that this was where the troop trains arrived, where she would first see him again. Then, October 15th, 1945, the longest entry, James is coming home. His telegram arrived this morning. October 20th, 8 p.m. Grand Central, track 117. Wait for me where we met. All my love, Jay. 5 days. 5 days until my life truly begins. I've told no one, not even Mother. This moment will be ours alone, a secret carved into the marble of this place we've made sacred through our patience. Arthur felt his chest tighten. October 20th, 1945. He flipped the page, desperate to read about their reunion, but found only one more entry, dated that morning. Tonight, 8 p.m. I'm wearing the blue dress he loved from the photograph I sent. I've been at the station since noon, too nervous to leave. I've cleaned my gloves 3 times. Other soldiers have been arriving all day, falling into the arms of their families, and each time my heart stops, thinking it might be him. The information booth clock reads 3:47, 4 hours and 13 minutes. I'm going to wait in the ladies' lounge near track 117 until closer to time. If anyone finds this diary, please know that I have never been happier than I am in this moment of anticipation. The next page was blank, as was the next, and the next. Arthur frantically flipped through the remaining pages, finding nothing but untouched paper, yellowed by time, but never marked by Eleanor's pen. He checked the binding, wondering if pages had been torn out, but found it intact. The story simply stopped, suspended forever at 3:47 p.m. on October 20th, 1945, Eleanor waiting in perfect happiness for a reunion that the diary never recorded. Arthur stood up abruptly, pacing the small closet. What had happened? Had James arrived? Had they reunited and been so swept up in joy that Eleanor never returned to her diary? Or had something gone wrong? He thought of all the possibilities. A train delayed, a telegram with the wrong information, a last-minute change of plans. Or worse, he'd cleaned these halls long enough to know that not every story ended happily, that sometimes the most anticipated moments became the most devastating. He emerged from the closet and walked to track 117, now a modern platform with LED displays and automated announcements. A few late-night commuters waited for the 11:47 to Stamford, absorbed in their phones, unaware of the history beneath their feet. Arthur tried to imagine it as it would have been in 1945. Steam engines, wooden benches, crowds of uniforms, families with homemade welcome signs. He walked to the nearest bathroom, the one where he'd found the diary, and stood in the doorway. Had Eleanor come here that night, checking her appearance one last time before the moment she'd waited years for? Had she stood at these same mirrors, smoothing her blue dress, practicing her smile? The terminal's public address system crackled to life, announcing a delay on the New Haven line, and Arthur realized he'd been standing there for 20 minutes, lost in the mystery of Eleanor and James, their story now part of his own narrative, an unfinished symphony that demanded resolution. Arthur couldn't let it go. Over the next 3 weeks, he became an amateur detective, using his breaks to research Eleanor Margaret Hartley and Lieutenant James Sullivan. The New York Public Library's genealogy room became his second home during daylight hours. He learned to navigate military archives online, searching for bomber crews, casualty lists, discharge records. His notebook filled with leads that went nowhere, names that led to dead ends, records destroyed in fires or lost to bureaucratic indifference. Then, on a grey Thursday morning, a breakthrough. The 1950 census showed an Eleanor Hartley Sullivan living in Yonkers with a husband named James and 2 children. Arthur's heart raced as he traced the records forward. James Sullivan, employed by Pan American Airways as a pilot, died in 1987. Eleanor had lived until 2001, passing away at Mount Sinai Hospital at the age of 80. They'd had 4 children, 11 grandchildren. A life fully lived, it seemed, despite the diary's abrupt ending. But Arthur needed more. He found an obituary that mentioned Eleanor's youngest daughter, Patricia Sullivan Chen, a retired teacher living in Forest Hills. After 3 days of deliberation, he called her, his voice shaking as he explained about the diary. There was a long silence before Patricia spoke. My mother always said she lost something precious at Grand Central. We thought she meant metaphorically, you know, her youth or innocence or something. She only went back once, for my wedding photos in 1975, and she cried the whole time. They met the following Sunday at a diner in Forest Hills. Patricia, 71 years old with her mother's eyes, held the diary with trembling hands. She read in silence while Arthur nursed his coffee, watching recognition dawn across her face. "This is her handwriting," she whispered. "And this is why she never talked about the war years. She always said life began when she met Dad, but never explained what came before." Patricia told Arthur what she knew. James had indeed arrived on October 20th, 1945, but not at track 117. A last-minute change had rerouted his train to Penn Station. He'd rushed to Grand Central, arriving at 11 p.m. to find Eleanor still waiting, convinced he hadn't come. "Dad said he found her crying by the information booth," Patricia explained. "She'd been there for 11 hours. He always joked that she nearly slapped him before kissing him, angry that he'd put her through that wait. They were married 2 weeks later." "But why didn't she finish the diary?" Arthur asked. Patricia smiled, her mother's smile captured in an aged face. "I think when you wait that long for happiness, when it finally arrives, you don't want to waste time writing about it. You want to live it." Mum threw herself into being present, into the actual life she'd dreamed about. Maybe she meant to go back and finish the story, but life kept happening. Dad's job took them all over the world. Kids came quickly. The diary became part of the past she'd left at the station. Arthur pulled out his phone, showing Patricia photographs he'd taken of the bathroom, the radiator, the exact spot where the diary had spent 70 years. She must have set it down that night, maybe when she was checking her appearance, and it fell behind. In the joy or chaos of reunion, she forgot about it. Patricia touched the diary's cover gently. May I keep this? My children, her grandchildren, they should know this story. Mum was always so composed, so practical. They should know she was once a young woman who waited all day for love, who wrote such beautiful things about hope. Arthur nodded, though parting with the diary felt like losing something essential. Over the past weeks, Eleanor had become real to him, more real than most of the living people he encountered. Her story had given his nights purpose, had transformed his routine cleaning into something more like archaeology, uncovering layers of human experience in the most mundane spaces. As they parted, Patricia hugged him, this man who'd found her mother's youth hidden in a bathroom wall. She would have been glad it was you, Patricia said, someone who understood the importance of forgotten things, who took the time to find her again. You gave her story an ending, even if it wasn't the one written down. Arthur returned to work that night, pushing his cart through the familiar corridors with a strange sense of completion and loss. He stopped at track 117, now understanding that this platform had been a threshold between Eleanor's years of waiting and her lifetime of living. The bathroom still needed cleaning, the mirrors still showed the smudges of 1,000 passing faces, but now Arthur knew that one of those faces had belonged to Eleanor Hartley, adjusting her blue dress, preparing for a reunion that would come 3 hours late, but last 42 years. He cleaned with extra care that night, as if honoring Eleanor's memory through his attention to these forgotten spaces. And sometimes, when he found other objects, a child's toy, a love letter, a photograph, he wondered about their stories, the lives they represented, the reunions or partings they witnessed. Arthur Kowalski, custodian of Grand Central's nighttime quiet, had become something more, a guardian of memories, a keeper of stories that waited in the darkness for someone to remember that every forgotten thing was once held by human hands, once mattered to a beating heart. Eleanor's diary had taught him that his work wasn't just about cleaning spaces, but about preserving the invisible history that accumulated in the corners where no one thought to look, in the gaps between what was documented and what was lived, in the silence between the last train and the first morning light,